Alright, what's going on everyone? Today I'm going to show you how to upgrade the standard Azorius controlled Challenger deck into a Pioneer deck. We usually don't exceed the deck's retail price with our upgrades, which is around $30 USD, and I must say, I only went over the budget a tiny bit, I swear. So the good news about Azorius Control is it is a fairly linear upgrade path. The deck has a ton of old standard removal, counter spells, board wipes, and it's pretty simple to just upgrade these with Pioneer grade versions of the same effects. The main problem with this archetype, however, is the Planeswalkers. They're very expensive and they are universally played. I mean, these are just like in every deck. I can't add these because I would never break the budget, or at least not by much. So the good news is there are plenty of budget options we can play in the meantime that have actually proven to be pretty solid stand-ins, and I've been pretty happy with the deck in my testing. Let's start by taking out 2 Archon of Sun's Grace for 2 Teferi Tireless Pilgrim. This is the most expensive upgrade, but it's absolutely worth it. The Archon of Sun's Grace it's actually kind of a pet card of mine. I love this thing. I played it a lot in Standard. I've tried to play it in like Enchantress builds in Pioneer. It's super cool, but it just doesn't feel great in this deck as we're usually looking to hold up mana for counter spells in the early game, and it just never feels good to play. Teferi, on the other hand, he draws cards for 0. Technically, he draws cards for +1. It's 0 to draw a card, but he gets loyalty when you draw a card, so it's basically +1. He also makes 2/2s that get +1/+1 counters when you draw, and this is going to be a major win condition as it synergizes really well with the other cards that are in this deck. We're going to have a lot of card draw matters stuff, and it feels pretty good. So next, let's take out 3 Birth of Meletis for 3 Censor. The enchantment was awesome in Standard. It's a little bit slow in Pioneer though. Censor, on the other hand, it's great because it's either a counter spell in the early game when the opponents are usually tapping out to play on curve, but then it just turns into a card draw in the late game. If you have this in your opening hand, you're basically looking for any opportunity to counter a spell, and by the time you get to like turn 6 or 7, at that point it's just a redraw. And it's really good in this deck because we have lots of payoffs for drawing cards. Our 4th Birth of Meletis is going to Narset, Parter of Veils. This is just an exceptional tech piece for control. It finds spells, it prevents the opponent from drawing, and it will usually end up soaking up some damage as well, which is fine. If we're under pressure, our opponent getting distracted by attacking this is usually fine. So perfectly happy to have 1 copy. Next, we'll take out 1 Omen of the Sea for 1 Memory Deluge. While this doesn't technically draw, and we do care about drawing, I like having 1 of these just because it often feels game winning once you reach the point where you're casting the flashback. Digging that deep for a couple cards in the late game is often just absolutely backbreaking for the opponent. Next, we're going to take out 2 Skyclave Clerics for 2 Dovin Bonds. This might seem weird because, well, it's not a popular Planeswalker, but I just needed a Planeswalker that could protect itself and draw cards, and this actually ended up working pretty well. His plus is basically going to neutralize the creature, gives it -3/-0, so that helps him stay alive early. And then once he builds up a bunch of loyalty, he can minus to gain life and draw, which is just fantastic in this deck. So those are our major upgrades. Now let's talk about the linear upgrades. Now when I say linear, I mean we're going to upgrade a counter spell for a more powerful one. We're going to upgrade a board sweeper for a more powerful one, right? And look, we're technically a teensy bit over budget, but the good news about basically everything you're about to see is it's all kind of optional and you can kind of pick and choose what you think is important for you. You'll see what I mean. Like for example, we'll start by taking out 2 Shatter the Sky for 2 Supreme Verdicts. You could absolutely just play with Shatter the Sky, but the reason Supreme Verdict is so popular is the very important text of it can't be countered. That is critical against tempo decks. For example, Spirits. They're very good at pressuring and they're very good at countering board sweepers. So the can't be countered text is critical. Is that worth $2 per copy? That's up to you, and that's sort of how this entire section is going to go. So next we're going to take out a Doomscar for a 3rd Supreme Verdict. Same reason. It's expensive, it can be countered, and Supreme Verdict is just like the pinnacle of board sweepers. in Pioneer. Next, we're going to take out 2 Neutralize for 2 Absorb. The cycling is fine, but countering a spell and gaining 3 life is brutal against red aggro. One of the hardest things to do with this deck, or any blue-white control deck, is stabilizing against aggro, because they pressure you so hard in the first few turns. So countering a spell which slows them down and gaining some life back is critical for just not dying in the first few turns against aggro. So for a similar reason, we're going to take out a 3rd Neutralize for No More Lies. Something this deck really struggles with is playing on the draw. When your opponent goes first, you are so far behind and your counter spells are so clunky. Obviously, the problem with these types of counter spells is the opponent can pay mana to not have them countered in the late game, but we need early game counters for the first couple turns just so we can survive aggro decks. So 2 mana, you're usually going to counter anything for the first 3 or 4 turns, and it does become less useful, but we have lots of filtering and stuff too, so it's fine in the late game. But we just need early game counter spells. So for the same reason, we'll take out Saw It Coming for a 2nd No More Lies. Saw It Coming is okay, though to be honest, if I'm going to play a 3 mana counter spell, I'd rather have Absorb or 3 Steps Ahead, or Sinister Sabotage. There's lots of stuff I'd rather play over Saw It Coming. It's pretty low on the list of 3 mana counter spells, but I care more about having early game interaction. So a 2 mana counter spell is what I'm looking for in this deck right now. We're also going to take out 2 Banishing Light for 2 Portable Hole. I can't stress how important it is to stay alive early. Banishing Light, clearly the better removal spell. It can remove anything, but 3 mana is often just too late. We need turn 1, turn 2 ways to stop aggro early, so even though Portable Hole can only exile small things, that's all we need. We just need stuff to do on turn 1 and 2 that keep us alive. So we need efficient, low cost removal. It's okay if it's ineffective in the late game, because in the late game we're going to be casting Board Sweepers and Planeswalkers, and then it's okay. We don't care. But we need stuff early. So more efficiency here. We're going to take out 2 Behold the Multiverse for 2 Consider. This is, again, all about efficiency. In the early game, being able to filter to hunt for removal, to hunt for board wipes, I mean, that's just really important. Behold the Multiverse is so hard to cast in the first few turns. I mean, tapping out for it on turn 4 is just not okay. Obviously, it's great on turn 10, but Consider's fine there as well. So yeah, we just need something early. So we're going with Consider. So for the same reason, we're going to take out a Thirst for Meaning for a 3rd Consider. Thirst is incredibly powerful in this deck with Dream Trawler and Teferi, and we will absolutely love casting those, but I want to take out 1 for just another low curve filter card to search for early game removal when we're being pressured. And finally, we're going to take out 3 Elspeth Conquers Death for 3 Fateful Absence. For all the same reasons I've been saying, the Saga is really cool. It was really good in Standard, but 5 mana removal is just super clunky. It's cool that it reanimates something, but we just need to kill stuff early, and Fateful Absence will do it for us. So, moving on to the mana base, as always, I like to point out that the dual lands in Pioneer aren't incredibly expensive. There are some expensive ones, of course, but there are lots of cheap ones, especially when you're comparing them to Modern and Legacy duels. These don't seem so bad. However, they are out of reach for our budget, so I can't include them in this video. I do encourage you to keep an eye out for these though, especially since we have some very color intensive spells, and basic lands will probably cost us a game from time to time. Anyway, on a budget, we can take out 2 Tranquil Coves for 2 Restless Anchorage. If I'm going to play a tap land, I'd much rather it animate into a creature as opposed to gaining life. We can also take out 2 Tranquil Coves for 2 Glacial Fortress. These won't always enter untapped, but they often do. Or at the very least, they sometimes do, as opposed to the Coves, which never enter untapped. And because of that, and because these are so cheap, let's take out a Plains for a 3rd Fortress. I wanted to increase the number of blue sources in the deck, so this seems like a fine way to do it. Though if you don't want to buy the 3rd Fortress, I do recommend taking out a Plains for an island. And finally, we can take out 1 Plains for 1 Castle Ardenvale. These are super cheap, great to play on a budget, and they can make 1/1s. 4 mana to make a 1/1 is fine in the late game, especially if you're in top deck mode. You can sometimes make 3 or 4 of these and win the game with them. Moving on to the sideboard, I do want to make a quick note that it's actually common to play cats in the sideboard. This might seem weird, but it's an actual strategy. Some decks play an entire tribal cat package, and they bring it in and kind of turn the deck into an Azorius tempo deck of sorts in certain matchups. Brimaz is very expensive though, so I think I'm going to stick to a more traditional Azorius control sideboard. So we'll start by taking out 2 confounding conundrums for 2 rest in peace. The conundrum was used in standard against a specific deck that isn't super relevant in Pioneer, and Rest in Peace is just a solid sideboard option for graveyards. So glad these are finally affordable for budget decks. We'll take out another conundrum for a Damping Sphere, which is used to hose decks that are either cheating on mana or trying to play multiple spells per turn, like Is It Phoenix for example. And our last change is Archon of Sun's Grace for Torrential Gearhulk. So the Gearhulk doesn't technically see a ton of play, but I wanted another win condition, and most of the win condition sideboard pieces are very expensive in Pioneer. But the Gearhulk is actually solid. It's 6 mana, 5/6 flash, so you can play it end of turn, which makes it very good against control and mid-range matchups. I've actually found it to be pretty useful. So yeah, I'm a fan, and super cheap, which I'm definitely a fan of for the series. And yeah, that is our upgrades. It is indeed, it's a little bit over budget, but as I said, a lot of these are just kind of optional optimizations that you can probably make over time, so there's no reason to go out and buy these all at once. And this deck is much more capable of winning games just because it's much more capable of surviving the early game, which was a major problem with the standard deck, because it was built for standard, right? And standard is slower, so when you take a standard control deck and move it to Pioneer, the decks are faster, and it couldn't hold up to the aggressiveness of Pioneer decks. That was a major problem that I had with it. So yeah, that's it. If you're interested in seeing gameplay with this, I will have a video in the future, probably a couple days, so be sure to subscribe if you're interested in that. And in the meantime, thanks for watching everyone. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.